Throughout the later half of the 20th century, a technological revolution took place. Today, interactive entertainment, the video game industry, brings in billions and billions of dollars every year, but the high-budget, high-concept games of today were once these space-age toys of tomorrow. Science fiction and futuristic settings have been hallmarks of gaming since the beginning of the medium, and this week on the videocast, we are going to be looking at that, futurism, and retro video games. Now, for some of these, there is not a whole lot to go off of, so we are going to be looking mostly at the game's marketing material. Also, I'm not the most tech-savvy person, so a lot of this is going to be aesthetic-based. We aren't really going to be getting into technical specs or hardware, more so the aesthetics and settings of these games. I know the term retro can be divisive or subjective, but we will be covering the first 40 or so years of interactive entertainment, so the 1950s through the 1980s, with a focus on arcade and home console gaming. That is a long time, and what the future is changes. We will be seeing how the future of different times inspired some of these games, so this is going to serve not only as a history of video games, but also a history of the future. Before we get into it, this and every video on this channel, and our other one, was made possible thanks to our patrons over at patreon.com/pixandportraits. There's a ton of stuff over there relating to gaming history, same with the future, feature film, retrofuturism in movies. $5 a month gets you access to that and helps keep these videos coming out. Liking and sharing also helps out a lot, but if you like what we do and have the means, please consider supporting us, patreon.com/pixandportraits. Now that we got the plugs out of the way, let's head back to the future. Video games were born in the space age, and if we look at the future of that period, it's no surprise. This was an optimistic time when anything, no matter how absurd or frivolous, seemed possible. Touch button convenience, an extremely high quality of living, and the possibility or promise of exploring strange new worlds. Of course, a lot of this was an illusion. Some of the inventions thought up would not be feasible at all, or would take years to come to fruition in a much different form than first imagined. This goes for one of the earliest video games, Bertie the Brain, which was quote-unquote released in 1950. Bertie was showcased as part of that year's Canadian National Exhibition, the CNE, the X. I have a great deal of affection for the CNE. For those unfamiliar, it's like a state fair now, but in the past, it was more like a World's Fair where new inventions and ideas were shown, like Bertie the Brain. This was an early AI that would play a game of tic-tac-toe against a human player who used a controller to input commands. It's pretty wild that users could adjust the difficulty here, given how old this is. It had a visual display, but it was not actually displaying graphics, but using light bulbs that responded to the user's selections. Never took off, people saw it as a novelty, and after the X concluded, it was disassembled, and that was it. Video games are games, obviously, and many early examples sought to recreate or reinterpret games through technology. Bertie with tic-tac-toe, or here, Tennis for Two, from 1958. Using an oscilloscope, this simulated a game of tennis, which a very popular game would also do, which we will get to. People could even play against each other, but when we're thinking of the future and where games would go, everything starts with Space War. 1962, arguably the peak of the space age. Humans had left the planet, but even today we are still far off from the warring spacecrafts of Space War. Just like Tennis for Two, it was a multiplayer game where users competed against each other in two distinct spacecrafts orbiting a star. Space War was developed by Steve Russell for the PDP-1 minicomputer at MIT. Home PCs didn't exist at this point, but it was extremely popular among programmers, people who had access to computers. Its code was built upon to add new features and gameplay options throughout the years. Obviously, because of what you needed to run it, it didn't reach huge commercial success, but it did inspire a lot of things that would. Its DNA can be found in Computer Space, designed by Atari founders Nolan Bushnell and Ted Dabney in 1971. This is a very similar game with improved graphics and sound. Much of what we looked at was not meant for the general public. Video games were something programmers and academics played around with. But Computer Space was different as it was released commercially. It was advertised as futuristic, the cabinet it came in was designed to look futuristic, and presented not only as a new game, but a new concept entirely. Despite being basically a remake, it was advertised as innovative and cutting edge, and in that way it was. Turns out people like playing games, and aiming a product like Computer Space at consumers worked. It sold very well. Shortly after this, Bushnell and Dabney formed Atari, released Pong, and kicked off the golden age of gaming. Gaming came home with the first commercially released home console, the Magnavox Odyssey, in 1972. This was designed by Ralph Baer of Sanders Associates, which was a defense contractor that made electronic systems for both military and commercial use, like aircraft protection systems and infrared imaging. To say the Magnavox Odyssey is primitive would be an understatement. It could only display 3 dots, 2 of which the players could control, and a single line. Different plastic overlays could be purchased, the users would stick to the TV, and a lot of imagination was needed to enjoy the games as intended. A lot of the games play the same, regardless of the overlay. Pong, basically. A few of the games used light gun technology, and a rifle accessory was sold separately. These played similar to a shooting game at a carnival. Its name, Odyssey, traveling to strange new places. The design is very of the time, with brown or wood paneling, but the type font used is very futuristic. The public needed home gaming to be explained to them, as seen in both TV and in print ads. One commercial introduces it as the electronic game of the future, and that couldn't be more right. While it was not the most powerful or successful system, it introduced the public to home gaming. At this point, I would like to head back to the distant past, even from the 1970s to the 19th century, and the penny arcade. These were public amusement centers with several coin-operated games. They grew out of the carnival and games of chance. Entertainment back then was very different. You had to wait months for the carnival to come to town. A few times a year it would. Hopefully, you didn't miss it. Penny arcades were created to more or less be carnivals that would stay in the same place. They had the same type of attractions, fortune-telling, love testing, only they were automated, coin-operated. They also had mutoscopes, which were an early way to view film reels. Adult movies were apparently very popular, which gave penny arcades kind of a seedy reputation. This business model was a hit, whether a penny arcade or a pleasure pier. People loved the idea of an amusement center with machines they could interact with. As technology evolved and prices increased, arcades dropped the penny and incorporated different types of games, light gun games, pinball, electromagnetical games. These were probably the closest to what we know as video games. They go as far back as the 1930s, with Nematron showcased at the New York World's Fair. I say it every time it's mentioned, the 1939 World's Fair was iconic in terms of retrofuturism. Some electromechanical games had moving parts and film projection to help immerse you in the game. One example is Autotest, 1954, which apparently was actually used to help people learn how to drive. Also Periscope, where you could sink ships from a submarine, very popular. This is the era where we start seeing Sega, Midway, Namco, all companies that would transition into video game developing and publishing, and these games had a huge influence over what gaming would become. Back in the future, the early 1970s, Dabney and Bushnell founded their amusement company Atari and revolutionized the industry with the release of Pong and arcades, 1972. It was a game similar to tennis, where 2 players could hit a ball back and forth, or 1 player against the computer. Incredibly popular game. Arcades exploded in popularity. This is also when a lot of malls were being built, and they were a match made in heaven. Machines popped up anywhere there was likely to be kids, like pizza parlors. Chuck E. Cheese, founded by Bushnell, was a chain of pizza restaurants with arcade machines as its backbone. This period, the 1970s and early 80s, was the golden age of arcade games. Several iconic games were released, like Donkey Kong and Pac-Man. As we have moved forward in time, I'd like to look at the future again, because though we are only a few years removed from the 1960s, in some ways the future is drastically different. The unfettered optimism of previous decades gave way to rational discussions as to whether these incredible imagined futures were even possible. The Cold War, tensions between the US and Soviet Union fueled the space race. America had landed on the moon, where in the recent past it was believed we would soon be living in space, and the reality of space exploration and colonization moved much slower. Space missions continued, like Skylab, but after landing on the moon, public interest in space declined, as did NASA's funding. Humans' impact on the environment was also becoming known. Due to carbon emissions, there were concerns of the effect fossil fuel production has on our climate. Our recent video on WALL-E looked at post-futurism, and this is where the idea really started gaining more attention. We were learning that resources like water, fuel, food were finite, and constant increased growth is not sustainable. Projections of an increased global population pose concerns as well. Some of these projections were made by computers, which were quickly evolving. We are going to be seeing more of that. Technology in general was rapidly advancing. We were entering the information age, and information became more accessible than ever. So much was changing so quickly that it was negatively affecting people. Future shock, leaving them with stress, anxiety, feelings of isolation. Not exactly the happy-go-lucky future of a decade earlier. Now, retrofuturism is more than just explicit predictions of the future. It can also be an aesthetic. There's a lot of crossover with science fiction, so some of what we are going to be looking at isn't necessarily set in the future, but definitely will evoke the feeling of it. Given gaming grew out of space war in the space age, so many early games used space as a theme in situations that were simply not possible then. It spawned a ton of clones, like Computer Space or 1977's Space Wars. Early gaming was rife with piracy and plagiarism, with even the largest companies ripping each other off. One of the most influential and copied games ever was 1978's Space Invaders, developed by Tomohiro Nishikado. In this game, wave after wave of alien forces descend on Earth, and the player has to shoot them down before they land on the surface. While Pong got people hooked on video games, Space Invaders really kicked everything off. It sold very well, and in doing so set a new standard, not only for gaming as a medium, but also for profits. Looking at these flyers, marketing flyers which were sent to businesses, we see over and over again the promise of profits, how much money you're going to make. And people were making money. Business was booming. Following Space Invaders' lead, we got another hugely popular game, Galaxian, in 1979, Astro Fighter as well. Sex appeal was used to sell games in the West, while in Japan, where a lot of these games were developed, focused more on futuristic designs. Astro Fighter did both, tapping into Star Trek here. That same year, Cinematronics released Starhawk, which looks a little different thanks to its use of vector graphics. There is something about vector graphics that will always look futuristic to me. Asteroids was another video game benchmark for Atari in the late 70s. Being such a young medium, video games evolved quickly through a dialogue between different developers and games. One thing inspired another, or one company, Space War, Computer Space, influencing Space Invaders, which then influenced Asteroids. Things were moving very quickly. Into the 1980s, Zero Hour, which had an awesome illustration of a ship traveling through meteorites in its marketing material. Stratovox, or Speak and Rescue, another Space Invaders clone with some beautiful color graphics. It also marketed itself as the first talking video game, having synthesized voices. Also in 1980, another vector game from Cinematronics, Star Castle, as well as Space Zap. As you can see, graphics are quickly improving and becoming more detailed. Up next, we have some arcade games from a little company called Nintendo. We will see in a bit how they would go on to dominate the home console market, but Nintendo's earliest video games appeared in the arcade. Donkey Kong was the most popular, but they also produced space-related games like Space Launcher and Space Demon, both Space Invaders clones. Nintendo also released Radar Scope and Space Firebird in 1980. Again, very similar to Space Invaders, just further proof of its influence. 1981, arcades arguably peak in popularity. They are the subject of news reports, focusing on parents' concerns of the effect video games have on children. This summer, we are going to be looking at moral panics over on Patreon, and video games were definitely subject to their share of parental outrage. 1981 saw the release of Galaga, notable, Galaxian sequel. This is also the year Defender was released. It was marketed as a Brave New World, and in terms of presentation, it definitely was. Its use of side-scrolling, back and forth, made it so the player could navigate a world that existed outside of the current screen. For those of us who are younger, hard to believe, but this was mind-blowing at the time. There was also a mini-map that showed users this world. Scramble, which came out 2 months later, did something similar, but was more on the rails. The ability to move like this gave Defender a sense of freedom that made the game feel comparably huge. The visuals and sound were also great, years ahead of its time and its contemporaries. Just a monumental success, and in the running for the greatest arcade game, or at least the most important. Back to the home console market, in 1972 we saw the launch of the Magnavox Odyssey, the first home video game console. The Odyssey was sold throughout 1975 and spawned several different versions. Over the next few years, multiple consoles were released in the Odyssey series, with every new iteration improving performance and adding new games. The Odyssey also spawned several competitor consoles, like the Coleco Telstar system, first released in 1976. This had 3 preloaded games you could literally switch between. It had tennis, hockey, and handball. These machines were not designed to have new games loaded into them, so like the Odyssey, multiple consoles were released with improved specs or different games. These consoles also came with their own unique controllers or peripherals. Marksman came with a rifle. The Telstar Arcade combined a few different games and accessories, like a steering wheel for racing, a gun for a shooter, classic tennis, Pong. Most of these consoles just came with preloaded games, that's why so many different versions were released. They couldn't just offer new software, so an entirely new console was needed. This changed with the Fairchild Channel F, the first console to use game cartridges or video carts that could be swapped out. These were numbered and followed a similar design. In terms of futuristic games, there was Video Card 13, Robot War, as well as 23, Galactic Space Wars. 13's cover has this robot on it that looks very similar to Star Wars R2-D2, while 23 has a classic spaceship design. While this art is interesting, the actual gameplay for both leaves a lot to be desired. Again, the covers and advertisements for these games were a lot more detailed than the in-game graphics. In 1975, Pong came home. Atari entered a deal with retail giant Sears to release the home version of Pong exclusively through their stores, branded with the Sears Telegames label. This success led to the release of Atari's first home console, the Atari VCS, later known as the 2600. For many, this is where home console gaming really began. As this overlapped with the golden age of arcade games, many of the console's classics were simply ports from the arcade. The Atari offered home versions of Space Invaders, Asteroids, Defender, all of which we've already covered. Given Atari's success and popularity, there is a ton of marketing material, like commercials. Here is one for the Flash Gordon-like Space Cavern from 1982. Something else unique to Atari is the fact that they were releasing games for both the 2600 and for Sears Telegames. Here is 2 versions of the iconic Space War, same game, different marketing. Atari's success proved there was a market for home console gaming, and like Space War and Space Invaders before it, it spawned a ton of competition from rival consoles, like the Bally Astrocade, which had some games set in the future. A lot of these are just clones of other popular games. Astro Battle 2009, Space Invaders clone. The 2009 is apparently not the year, but the model number, similar to the Channel F, numbered carts. Still, sounds futuristic. Star Battle 2005 shamelessly rips off Star Wars. Gameplay is basically the trench run. 1981's Space Fortress 2012, another clone. Solar Conqueror 2018, and Cosmic Raiders 2019, which is very similar to Defender. After several models of the Odyssey were released, Magnavox introduced the Odyssey 2 in 1978. This had a great tagline and was used in its marketing: the excitement of a game, the mind of a computer. Like the first incarnation, the company logo is also very futuristic. In terms of games, Space Monster, yet another Space Invaders clone, Cosmic Conflict, and Invaders from Hyperspace, both from 1978, and have some awesome futuristic aesthetics, especially the cover for Hyperspace. I love this. In 1979, the Intellivision was released, arguably the second most popular console from this period. Intellivision, a portmanteau of Intelligent and Television from toy maker Mattel. They had this classic ad, the Galactic News, where they present upcoming releases as breaking news in the future. There was also Space Battle, Astro Smash, Space Armada, Star Strike, which is a lot like Star Battle or Star Wars, Space Hawk. I'm sure you've noticed there was a lot of similarities between these releases and consoles. Star Battle, Space something, Star something. A lot was being released, and much of it was similar, if not just a complete ripoff of what other companies were offering. Still, consoles continued coming out, like ColecoVision, released in 1982. Its space or future game Cosmic Avenger was a space shooter with some pretty great graphics. We fly and battle through a futuristic city with domes and bright colors. With so many games being released on various different consoles, the market quickly became extremely saturated. Couple that with a lack of quality control, and you have a recipe for collapse, which happened. In 1983, the booming video game industry crashed. Now this often gets pinned on one game, E.T. for the Atari, which highlighted a lack of quality control that was rampant at the time. It was produced in just 6 weeks, so it could be out for the 1982 holiday season. The game sold very well, but was notoriously bad. Poor graphics, janky controls, hundreds of thousands of copies were returned. It damaged Atari's reputation with consumers. At the time, Atari was industry leader, and this reflected very poorly on the industry as a whole. People were less likely to buy games, and stores were less likely to stock them. Another factor was market saturation. As we just saw, there were too many consoles and too little difference between them. There was only so much shelf space, people only had so much money, and they just stopped spending. Between 1982 and 1985, sales dropped from $3.2 billion to just $100 million. Companies went bankrupt, and consumers moved on. Moving well into a new decade means a new future, and in the early to mid-80s, cyberpunk was emerging as that new possible future. Dystopian in nature, cyberpunk is a darker take on tomorrow. As it was becoming clear the influence computers and other emerging tech would have on our lives, artists and futurists warned of increased surveillance, AI takeover, and the breakdown of society. Other cyberpunk hallmarks include megacorps or megacorporations who usually replace governments, hackers, techno. During this time, we got a lot of seminal pieces of cyberpunk. Blade Runner, which we just looked at over on Future Film, William Gibson's Neuromancer, the manga Akira, which would be adapted into anime later in the decade. All of these imagined a future where technology took over. These concerns were echoed in the real world as the personal computer was gaining in popularity. People started bringing computers into their homes. The Apple II, these new dream machines could help you work better, organize your home, your life, and you could even play games on them. Text-based games were all the rage. 1979's Space was one of the first sci-fi text-based RPGs set in the future. Also in 1979, Apple Truck was released, basically a fan-made Star Trek game. Robot War 1981 was set in the distant 2002, where humans no longer fight in war themselves, but instead use robots. 1982's AE is very cool. It is a shooter that takes place in the future, and it has these very detailed backgrounds that look great. That same year, Time magazine voted the computer as Person of the Year. Just as the home console market crashed, personal computers and PC gaming took off. Looking at ads from around this time, from Apple and their rivals, the Tandy Corporation and Commodore, it's marketed as the dawning of a new age, like we've seen a few times before now. They really highlight the versatility of computers, business, personal, and pleasure. In 1983, the same year the industry crashed, a home console was released that would eventually help resurrect it. The Family Computer, or Famicom, made by Nintendo. As we saw earlier, Nintendo was no stranger to video games. They had produced several for arcades, as well as the Color TV game series, first released in 1977. Like the Magnavox, several consoles were released with updated games preloaded up until 1980, which is when Nintendo's Game & Watch series of handheld games debuted, but nothing would have the impact that the Famicom did. The system itself was pretty futuristic, very sleek, streamlined, in line with space-age design. In 1984, a Zapper was released. The Famicom version was a much more realistic-looking pistol. The North American version took a more sci-fi design, as we'll see. Probably the most futuristic aspect of the Famicom was Rob, the robot, released in 1985. The 80s were robot-obsessed. Many appeared in movies. The Japanese commercial introducing Rob is very futuristic. It takes place in a city with armed game police that apparently hunt a man down for gaming. Rob functions similarly to the Zapper. Its sensors responded to flashes on the screen, so the player would input something, the screen would flash a certain pattern, and Rob responded to that. Rob's capabilities were really only utilized in two games, Gyromite and Stack Up. Rob would be instrumental in introducing Westerners to the Nintendo Entertainment System, or NES, Notice the language there, entertainment system, not video game. This was how Nintendo repackaged the Famicom in North America, with Rob as the focal point. You see him in much of the early advertising. His toy-like appearance allowed him and the NES to be marketed as a toy rather than a video game. The public was still soured on games after the crash. The console itself got a makeover as well. I mentioned earlier the Zapper's appearance changed. It took on a more futuristic design. I'm sure this had to do with not wanting the Zapper to look realistic, instead more like a toy. This marketing strategy worked, the NES was a hit, and Nintendo very quickly moved away from Rob and the idea that it wasn't a video game console. In this futuristic ad from around its launch, it would be reused later. I've seen it labeled from 1985 and 1987, but a group of cyberpunk youths walk onto a spaceship as a narrator asks, what will the future bring from Nintendo, before showing off several games. This is the first mention of Super Mario Bros. In our timeline, the console's killer app, and the breakthrough appearance of the company's mascot Mario. Mario first appeared in Donkey Kong in arcades, 1981, and in Mario Bros. In 1983, but Super Mario Bros. Is very much the beginning of Mario as a global pop culture icon. Mario wouldn't have any futuristic adventures for a couple of decades, but he did appear in this 1987 print ad for the Famicom 3D system. This was an accessory that only came out in Japan. It displayed certain games or certain parts of games in 3D, but it failed. If we are looking for a game set in the future, we need to look no further than Nintendo's science fiction franchise Metroid. Released in 1986, Metroid follows bounty hunter Samus Aran as she hunts down parasites known as Metroids. It takes place in 20X5, which I think is a weird way of representing a date. We will see 20XX. I've seen, 200X, but I've never seen the X replaced in the third numeral. It's kind of weird. Standard sci-fi fare in terms of plot or lore, but heavily inspired by Ridley Scott's Alien. You navigate narrow corridors. It has a sparse ambient soundtrack. One of the bosses is also named Ridley. As a lot of what we are seeing is advertising, it's interesting seeing the difference in how games were marketed in the East and West. In North America, a player is sucked into the TV to assume the role of Samus. In the Japanese Famicom commercial, there are these awesome tokusatsu scenes of Samus riding a disc. This is because in Japan, it was released for another Japanese-only peripheral, the Famicom Disk System. This was an add-on for the Famicom that allowed games to be played off of a floppy disk. This was marketed as the beginning of a new age in gaming. Spoiler, it wasn't. Nintendo would return to cartridges, but one really interesting thing about the disk system is that games could be rewritten. This kiosk would be in stores, and consumers could bring their old games in and have new ones written to the disc. Kinda cool. One of the most iconic video game characters from this or all time is Mega Man, who first appeared in Mega Man in 1987, known as Rockman in Japan. This was the start of a franchise or series of games that continues to this day. Set in 20XX, Mega Man is a humanoid robot that must battle robots under the control of the evil Dr. Wily. All of these robots were created by Dr. Light. They all have jobs, which they are themed after. Cutman, Electman. As the series went on, the concepts for these robots got lazier and weirder, kind of like Pokemon. Still, we get a lot of really great and creative designs for robots throughout the world. More differences in the way games were marketed around the world. You have been seeing these amazing anime commercials produced in Japan. I love these. In the US, relatively flat, unlike France, which got this wild ad that was like a news report with Mario as a newscaster. With some live action mixed in. 1988 was the year Nintendo really broke in North America. It was the hottest toy that holiday season, sold out everywhere, concern everywhere. Parents and child psychologists were on every news entertainment program, expressing fears that this was damaging kids' development, harming them. It was massive. A lot of their very aggressive marketing was centered on power. Now you're playing with power. This isn't like those old Atari games. This is the future. They even had a movie that revolved around the NES, The Wizard, which famously featured the next thing we're going to be looking at. Another peripheral, the Power Glove.
It's so bad.
This looks like something straight out of the future, a programmable glove that replaced the controller and lets you interact with games using only the movement of your hand. Different games had different codes you had to input in order for it to work, and that is a term that I use lightly. What it promised to do and what it actually did was very different. It was not the most reliable piece of tech. In North America, the Power Glove was produced by Mattel. The commercial for it isn't the most futuristic, but the Japanese one featured RoboCop and was used to promote that game. Another movie we covered on Future Film. This commercial used some aesthetics associated with the Terminator as well. We are going to be wrapping up today with Nintendo's return to handheld gaming, the Game Boy, released in 1989. This was a portable console that marketed itself as having all the power of Nintendo in the palm of your hand. Again, power. Hugely successful console, thanks in no small part to Tetris and its casual appeal. The Game Boy was first marketed with this very sci-fi inspired futuristic commercial. A player is pitted against an evil-looking robot, showing you can link your console to other consoles. The packaging is also pretty futuristic with the vector background. After 40 years, it's incredible to see the progress that was made, from the illusion of interactivity with Birdie the Brain to having a gaming console that literally fits in your pocket. Truly, the future had arrived. I plan on producing a follow-up to this into the 16-bit era, then the 90s and early 2000s. Yes, that is retro. The years keep coming, but that's going to do it for today. This was long, but this was not meant to be exhaustive. This topic is huge, and I'm sure there was a ton that I missed, so let me know in the comments what you think. What are some of your favorite features in retro gaming? If you enjoyed this video, give us a thumbs up, subscribe if you haven't, and if you had the means, please consider supporting us on Patreon. A lot of great stuff over there, $5 a month, and you can help keep videos coming out. Patreon.com/PixandPortraits. We have an entire video on how Fallout uses aesthetics we associate with the future to create its world. A bunch of other videos relating to the future. Check those out. As always, thank you so much for your interest in this channel, and thanks for watching. See you in the future.